Okay, everyone. This is the fourth video of the chapter 6 lecture about leisure's anthropology. And in this video, we will talk about cultural development, the last topic. Here, the development here is defined as the extent to which the resources of a given group have been brought into full productivity. So it's very economic idea. Right, so the traditional measures and indicators of development is like GDP, gross domestic product, or GDP per capita divided by population, right? We still compare countries by GDP per capita, but recently, I mean, over the past 20 years or so, there is this global phenomena to redefine development, what that means, and also how it should be measured. And there have been new measures that are proposed by different countries in their regions. For example, there's something called gross national happiness, GNH, proposed by a small country called Bhutan. And it was sensational because this country, small country, started to say that, hey, we're not going to measure our development only by GDP, but by happiness and including more of a quality of life thing, including, for example, lack of political corruption or gender equality, education quality, and many other things, really. It's been controversial, GNH, that some people say that it has failed. Other people say it's still going on and it's, it's doing okay. But research documents some positive potential impact in the educational sector. Another project called Human Development Index by the United Nations, UN, there's that too, and a Better Life Index by OECD, it's some dozens of countries around Pacific Ocean area, and their Canadian Index Wellbeing, which is a Canadian project. Here is the example of OECD's Better Life Index. Okay, so basically the idea here is that going beyond the GDP, going beyond the economic indicator, and being more comprehensive about what development can mean and how it should be measured. And different countries are kind of ranked by this Better Life Index, right? And you can each this flower thing on the left side, like flower petal kind of thing, that's country, right? The higher the better, arguably. But what's unique about this Better Life Index is that on the right side, there are 11 dimensions that this project consider as part of better life. And you, each individual, can basically rate how important each dimension is. Like, for example, housing, not that important, so keep it low. Maybe income, very important, right, after graduation from university. So make it really high. And then if you do that, those weighting will be reflected on our ranking, and the ranking changes dynamically. So you can really see, what would be the countries and region that could be good for you in terms of achieving your better life, right? It's about your better life because you have some control over it too. To us, the problem is that there isn't really no leisure here, right? There's a work-life balance at the bottom. It's still, there's work in it, so it's not really about leisure, and I wouldn't personally appreciate that because of that factor, but it could be very useful too for you. On the contrary, a Canadian project called the Canadian Index of Wellbeing, CIW, has leisure dimension. It also, like the other project, it measured several aspects of well-being, right, including economic development and leisure. And they did that in different communities, different regions in Canada, and they compared and they measured that over time, right? One of the major findings is actually related to leisure and the cultural dimension. Between 1994 and 2014, so that's a 20 years or so span, GDP of Canada increased by 38%. You guys are doing great. CIW overall, right, including leisure, recreation, and other economic aspect, increased by about 10%. Okay, still increasing, okay? Now, leisure and culture subdimension, right, part of this CRW overall, decreased by 9.3%. Yes, this is almost, leisure and culture is the only aspect that showed such a decrease over this period of time, specifically from give or take 2000 to 2012, 10, 11. Long-term decline. So really what this project suggests that overall other economic as well as other aspects of well-being in Canada have improved actually. The development has progressed arguably. Yet leisure and the culture aspect of life, our life, may have decreased in terms of quality, really, maybe as well as quantity as well. It's very, very important information for leisure students to know, right? Because that can be also used as the reason why we have to spend more resource and invest into this leisure and cultural aspect. Now, related to cultural development, the chapter talked about the concept called modernization. It's a transition from traditional rural agriculture-based society to a secular, non-religious, urban industrial society. And modernization enhances, well, there is criticism of modernization. But we must first know that modernization, by and large, overall, enhances the quality of leisure and life to an extent. For example, in a modernized society, industrialized society, we have more leisure option in general, right? Leisure facility, like for example, sports gyms, programs, sports programs, and products. Like if you want to exercise, you have you can buy sports gear very, very easy. Also, there is a strong evidence that the modernized societies tend to be happier, on average. For example, secularism, political secularism, not having religious affiliation in terms of politics, it's also positively correlated to national average happiness. Industrialization and GDP per capita economic development in country is also positively related to happiness to an extent, right? So there's that's a fact as well. However, always however, becoming modernized often means being like USA, Canada, other Western European countries, for example. So in this sense, it's very what is called ethnocentric or Eurocentric, right? It's the belief that your own culture or ethnic group is better than others. It's usually it's a very implicit, indirect assumptions that we make. But when we say, you have to industrialize your country, then that means you have to, most of the time, you have to become like us, me. Perhaps we're imposing Western notions of freedom, secularism, rationalism, individualism when we try to modernize other countries, really. And modernization may also destroy more traditional community-based leisure life, which also is very important to our well-being, happiness. And we can potentially, by doing so, by destroying it, can have a negative impact on well-being of the people. So there is a modernization, there's a criticism of that, including ethnocentrism, sorry. In reaction to it is postmodernism too. It's a reaction to the assumed certainty of modernity. Certainty as a modernity or modernization is always good. No, postmodernist perspective says that, no, that's not the case, always. That's not always the case. The benefits of modernization and a modernized culture society are not guaranteed nor universal. It doesn't mean that everybody benefits. There are many minority people in modernized society like Canada. They're still struggling a lot, right? And postmodernist perspective also criticized that modernized society tend to have this extreme consumerism, flashiness, very superficialness, and media. Everything is about media, not really, human interaction, which is a very ironic thing to talk about in this Zoom recording and online education, right? And some scholar, postmodernist scholar, even dare to say that our modern life have become reduced to sedentary, boring, largely void of excitement, challenge, and personal growth. That's a bold statement, right? But do you agree with this? I think there is some truth to the criticism, postmodernist criticism, but do you agree with this? Is your daily life sedentary, boring, largely devoid of challenge, excitement, and personal growth? Do you think so? Or are you actually, maybe the society in general is that way, but are you doing certain things to actually going against that? And what are the things, what are the strategies are you using? Related to cultural development and many other topics we discussed in chapter 6, chapter brings this very interesting case. And it's in that box thing, if you're reading an e-text, there's a little usually picture in the chapter, which I like usually. And there's a little statement and questions and all that kind of stuff sometimes. So check that out too. It's very informative sometimes. It gets your thinking going. And sometimes it could be on your exam too. So there's this story about the person called Abba Maiga. And he stood in his dirt country yard in Jeune, I don't know how to pronounce, sorry, sitting over the fact that his 150-year-old mud house is so culturally precious, he's not allowed to update it. No tile floors, no screen doors, no shower. This is because the guidelines established by UNESCO demand that any reconstruction not substantially alter the original. UNESCO recognized this space, including his house, as World Heritage. Now, Aber says, but we want development, more space, new appliances, things that are modern. And he and his fellow residents feel their lives are frozen in a time like pieces in a museum so that the visitors can come and go. And textbook ask very interesting critical questions related to that. So let's think about it. The first question is, what are the goals of the World Heritage Site program? This is very simple. You go to UNESCO website and you can see that mission goal statement. Now, secondly, what do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of the program? And also I want you to think about the last sentence in that previous statement. The visitor, there was a visitor who were gawking, looking, staring. And who are these visitors? Who tend to be these visitors? And what does that mean? This second question also keep going, asking, can the disadvantages of those World Heritage Program be reduced or eliminated and still maintain the advantages? Or can we, in other words, can we make it better? Any ideas? And finally, this is my question to you. How does Abba's case relate to any concept that we learned in chapter 6? Go beyond this cultural development section. Anything that relates to this. And can you explain it? Can you explain why? How are they related to each other? This is the end of chapter 6. And there are 4 things you want to make sure that you understood well in this chapter. First, can you explain the 4 characteristics of culture and how each relates to leisure? Secondly, can you explain, well, the 5th characteristic was about the second point, right? Culture changes. So can you explain the 4 main processes of culture changes and how each relates to leisure? Thirdly, What are the implications of material culture for our leisure and well-being? And finally, critically discuss relationship between cultural development and leisure, because development, at least in a traditional sense, isn't always a good thing, just like we discussed. Okay. This is the end of chapter 6 lectures, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Bye now.